Good morning, friends. The 6th Sunday after Trinity. And the intent is steadfast service. Steadfast service. Sort of sounds like a very old-fashioned thing, doesn't it? Steadfast service. And maybe we wouldn't even say that. I'm just reflecting a little bit about what the tendency of the age is. Not steadfast service necessarily. Perhaps loyalty is not valued as it should be. But let's pause for a moment and think about how that fits into today's lessons, Epistle and Gospel, and in the Collect, and think about how we might weave some of these ideas into our own life to make our life richer. As I say on many occasions, the more we are in alignment with our personal purpose, the purpose we're individually here for, and we have to find that out. We have to go on a little journey to find that out. The more we're in alignment with that, and simultaneously in alignment with God's will, the richer our life is, the more satisfactory it is. It shows up in all sorts of ways, but what you don't feel in that state is that you don't think that life is meaningless, and you don't get despair necessarily that can be cured by not thinking about yourself, but thinking about others. So it's easy anecdotes to find out where you are. An easy thermometer to put into your spiritual circumstances and measure. Are you in alignment? Are you doing what you're here to do? Steadfast service. Now, the Collect is very interesting. O God, who has prepared for thy faithful servants such good things as pass man's understanding. How about that for a Christmas present? Faithful servants, such as good things that pass man's understanding. I've told you about this little anecdote that I've got beside my bed, which says, when you're praying, God says yes, and then he says, just hang on a moment or two, maybe a little longer, because I'm preparing something even better for what you asked for, over and above what you asked for. And that little collection of aphorisms just reminds us how limited our understanding is. Not to be despairing about that, but just to be aware of how limited our understanding is, so that when we look at this passage here, thy faithful servants such good things as pass man's understanding, we keep that in perspective. We understand what that's saying. We are looking to God's inspiration to expand our understanding. Then the Collect goes on, may our hearts be so filled with love towards thee, that we, loving thee above all things, may show forth love, that love and continual service of the brethren. So there's a connection between the love of God and simultaneously the love of our brethren. So the epistle this morning, the epistle of St. Paul to the Romans that Wendy read this morning. This is one of the longest passages, one of the longest letters. We call it the epistle. It's a letter that St. Paul wrote. The scholars think he was in Corinth at that time. So for about 3 months he was telling the Christians that were gathered in Rome that he was coming, and he was writing them this fairly long letter, many chapters, but very pithy, very dense teaching. And he was telling them, reminding them, the community in Rome was Jews and Gentiles, maybe a little bit of friction between them. Maybe the Jews thought that the Gentiles should follow Jewish ways. That early stage of the church, like a lot of spiritual communities, need to sort out the human side of things before they get to the spiritual side of things. Always the same. Still exists today. So, St. Paul writing to the people gathered in Rome, and he's saying, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. What does that mean? You'll recall that the word sacrifice comes from roots meaning divine service or divine work. And we say at the beginning of the church service, of this Eucharist, we say, we recall, I'm just paraphrasing, we recall that we are a soul with a personality, and we ask you to remind us about that. And we ask that we be forgiven if we keep forgetting. But we would like to remember that and expand your influence coming through our soul into everything that we do. I'm just paraphrasing. That's what we say at the start of the Eucharist. And this is what this says, this particular epistle. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Present your bodies as sacred work, because you are imbued with God, imbued with Christ. And so it goes on, love without dissimilitude. Don't be nifty and crafty about it. Just let the love flow. So one of the things about perhaps esoteric side of things of Christianity is that we must think of our hearts like a magnet, like a love generator, which is not us, but the Christ within, so that when we open our hearts to everyone that we meet, this just allows the love to flow through us. So if we're sort of shriveled up and we're sort of making rough time of all sorts of things and a little bit miserable and all the rest of it, I mean, we like that from time to time. But if our general manner is like that, we are not releasing the gifts that we have been given. This love in our hearts from the Christ to spread amongst all men and women. And we're being asked in this epistle to continue to do it for service continually. And that's the steadfast service, one of the steadfast services that we do to our brethren. Now the epistle goes on to do all sorts of things, to suggest all sorts of things, to be accommodating to people where possible. Some people misunderstand this and say, well, we've got to sort of be two-faced about things. Quite the opposite. What we're doing is we recognize where our emphasis should be. We realize, we appreciate, and day on day we try to make it more and more real for us that we are of divine origin, and we want to spread that influence to everyone we meet. And so we don't take ourselves too seriously. We don't take our personality too seriously. We've learnt all sorts of things. So we've got knowledge, and then we've got understanding. That's understanding what the knowledge thing is when we learnt. So we can, like a parrot can say clever things. You say, oh, that parrot is very knowledgeable. That's about it. The parrot has no understanding, we think, and it's short on wisdom. So the three aspects: knowledge, understanding, and then what? Wisdom. We grow into wisdom where we can integrate, where it's appropriate, we can use it for the service of fellow man and for God. So this steadfast service requires us to always keep ourselves in perspective, but also not to be shrinking violets, not to recognize that we've got a role in life. Each individual is precious. Absolutely, this is the Christian message. Each individual has a contribution, and the first contribution is to open our hearts, allow Christ's love to come through, and then to serve people as we see fit, as they might allow. And then St. Paul's letter goes on with the things that we've heard before in the Beatitudes. Don't return evil for evil. Just ignore it. You can't deal with that by sending evil back the other way. It just doesn't work. And then concludes this passage, love worketh no ill to his neighbour. Therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. So if we just pause for a moment and think about this, what does this mean? This means the law, God's law, then is fulfilling love to one another, carrying this out in a constructive way. Every day we learn how to do it better. So this is the very essence of life here. So we have our tasks, we have our mission, we have our contribution, and all of it has to be carried on the love of God. And then we absolutely know we're in alignment. We absolutely know. Now St. Matthew is writing, and he's got this long passage which he's writing where he's recording teachings that Jesus gave about in Holy Week when he was talking to people just heading towards the Last Supper and the Passover and so on. He's talking a lot, in quite a lot of depth in this Holy Week. So before, parables, sowing the seeds and so on, explaining to people how this sort of fits in, what are the spiritual connotations of it. The disciples are saying to him, oh, what does that mean, and so on. And he's saying, well, look, you characters, wake up. I'm giving to the people ideas they can appreciate because of their working lives. You have to understand the depth of what I'm saying. And this passage in particular, talking about meeting people in need and did you help? Did you help or not? Now, this doesn't mean we all have to rush out and find people in the street and look after them. It does not mean that. I mean, you might choose to do that if the circumstances were right. But this gets to the heart of what steadfast service is all about, which is, what is your attitude? What is your attitude when you see other people? What is your attitude in dealing with people and in all walks of life? What is your attitude to people who need help? How do you go about that? Well, you have to be skillful. You have to be wise, particularly in our day and age, which is fundamentally different to the day and age that this was written in. But anyway, the point of this passage is, what is in your heart when you are meeting people in need? So, how do you serve people? Sharpen your wits. Look to see what's required. Should you act or not? Should you give or not? Should you participate or not? You have to work all that out. But coming from the love of God, coming from the love of Christ in your hearts, helps a great deal. And what this passage is saying is that if you don't continually practice that, well then, you're not in the team. You're in some other team, but you're not in Christ's team. You might be in your own team or something or other. So, we have to practice these things day on, day on, day on, all the time. And that's why this is such an important intent, steadfast service. Wake up in the morning and we can have a very simple prayer. The moment our eyes open, we can have a very simple prayer. Can I remember to take God's love, which is in my heart, into everything I do? Not to make myself necessarily the center of attention, but to make the love of Christ aware to other people. In fact, the more you put yourself in the way, it gets in the way. And that's sort of not the purpose of all this sort of thing. Almost become invisible is the best way to go about it. But we have to have a vehicle. We have to have a vehicle to deliver, and our vehicle is our body, our emotions, and our thoughts. That's our personality, what we call our personality. So, this is a very interesting passage that we can think about a lot. We can reflect on, regardless of what our occupation is, or regardless of what we do with our lives, or regardless of how we interact, or whatever. Every day is an opportunity to put this steadfast service into active work, not passively, but active. Even if you're just sitting on the bus, you can just silently give a blessing to everybody on the bus from the Christ within. Just shower everybody with this generator of love that you were born with. They were born with too, and this lights them up, lights everybody up. So think on these things this week. Give this due service and think about your daily work, your divine service as you go through life.